people fond of women and sex, the path to hell is wide open. The Mahatmas are equipoised. They do not see any difference between one living entity and another. They are very peaceful and are fully engaged in devotional service. They do not behave in any abominable way. Such people are known as Mahatmas. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The human body is like a junction. One may either take the path of liberation or the path leading to a hellish condition. How one can take these paths is described herein. On the path of liberation, one associates with Mahatmas, and on the path of bondage, one associates with those attached to sense gratification and women. There are two types of Mahatmas, the impersonalist and the devotee. Although their ultimate goal is different, the process of emancipation is almost the same. Both want eternal happiness. One seeks happiness in impersonal Brahman, and the other seeks happiness in the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As described in the first verse, Brahma Saukyam, Brahman means spiritual or eternal. Both the impersonalist and the devotees seek eternal blissful life. In any case, it is advised that one become perfect. In the words of Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 2287, Asat Sangha Tyaga E Vaishnav Achar, Stri Sangha Eka Asadu, Krishna Bhakta Ar. To remain unattached to the modes of material nature, one should avoid associating with those who are asat or materialistic. There are two kinds of materialists. One is attached to women and sense gratification, and the other is simply a non-devotee. So also I'm going to unpack this when I speak later, but attached to women for sense gratification also, I would say. Okay? And the other is simply a non-devotee. On the positive side is association with Mahatmas, and on the negative side is the avoidance of non-devotees and woman hunters. So we could make it non-sexist and say woman hunters or man hunters, right? So let me say a few prayers and then we can begin. Om Agyanitimarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksun Milatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Shri Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. And again, thank you all so much for inviting me. This is such an honor to be with all of you today. I'd like to unpack this verse in two parts. The first line of the purport is very important about the pivotal, how human life is a pivotal place. So I want to take the first half of the verse about that, and then I want to take the second half of the verse, which I think is often misunderstood. So let's try to do that together. The idea of the human form of life, maybe you can probably take it off the screen now, I think. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. So the soul, I am the soul, you are the soul, and our souls have been traveling progressively through the natural order of evolution, through the animal species of life, one after another, and we eventually come to the human form of life. So it's really interesting that Darwin, in his theory of evolution, he actually looked at the Padma Purana, and he took some of his ideas from the Padma Purana, but he missed the essential eternal principle. He didn't recognize what's traveling through these different species, and that is the soul. So that's a very, very interesting point to begin with, that the soul is traveling naturally and progressively through the animal species. But then when that soul comes to the human form of life, as Prabhupada says in the first line of the purport, the human form of life is a pivotal point where we have a choice. We have our free will to choose our future direction. So it's a very, very important and interesting point. At the juncture of human life, we can inquire and seek knowledge. Who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose? Why is our time here so temporary? Why do we have to die? Or we can choose to continue in what Srila Prabhupada calls polished animal life. Sometimes he talks about two-legged animals, and two-legged animals in the human form of life. So it's interesting because philosophers have called humans the rational animal, but I don't really agree with that, because you can see that animals are also rational, right? If any of you have ever had a cat, as soon as you leave the kitchen, the cat will jump up on the counter and try to eat what's up on the counter, or a dog will bark, right? A dog will bark to protect out of loyalty and out of fear, right? So, So man is rational, but the question is, how are we? Animals are rational, men are rational, humans are rational, but the question is, how do we apply that ration, right? So the difference, again, if you listen to Srila Prabhupada's taped lectures, you can often hear him talking about these 4 animal propensities: to eat, to sleep, to mate, and to fear, right? To defend ourselves. And humans we have atom bombs, animals have claws and jaws, right? So as a human being, I can eat in a 5-star restaurant, eating some kind of often unmentionable things. I can sleep and have sexual relationships, sexual affairs in a penthouse condo or in a mansion somewhere. But there's still always fear, right? Will she leave me? Will he leave me? Will the market crash? Will all my bitcoins become worthless, right? There's always fear, right? And on and on. So if we're only engaging in these 4 animal propensities, then in Prabhupada's thinking, we're only really more or less a polished version of an animal. The great Catholic theologian Thomas Merton said, people may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success only to find that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall, right? So spiritual life begins when someone inquires, why am I not satisfied, even if I get more and more and more of what I think I want? Why am I suffering? What is the purpose of this seemingly temporary life? Everyone I love is dying before my eyes, My mother has died, my grandfather has died, sometimes my dearest husband or wife or child. How tragic when children also die, right? So why? Who am I really? So the who, what, why is the beginning of human life. And Krishna, who is the ever merciful, ever listening friend, he's always traveling with us. We keep turning away, right? But he's always traveling with us through all our travels, through all the species, and he's just waiting What a patient friend. Have you ever had such a patient friend that you keep turning your back on that person and he's still there, always there, right? So he's waiting for what? He's waiting for some sincere inkling of a cry of why, He's just waiting for that. And then he sends some holy person, some what's called an agent of Vaikuntha, or an agent of the spiritual world, some saint, and to help us awaken to these messages of Krishna, or God by any name. So every one of us carries within ourselves those voices of the lower self and the higher self. And at every moment we can choose, we create our next steps. We create our future destiny on our journey. So we can lean into the light, or we can lean into the shadow, right? We can always choose at every moment. Because why? Why is that? Why doesn't Krishna just make us love him, bring us back to him? No, because love is never forced. We can choose love, or we can turn away from love time and time again. And every time we turn away, it becomes more easy or more habitual or addictive to turn away again. Or each time we try harder and choose to turn forward, to take a step forward to the light, as all of you are trying in this Bhakti Academy, it becomes easier to choose that higher dictation from that super friend, to choose our own higher self again and again next time. Have you ever had this experience that you go into the grocery store and you're looking for something to pick up at the grocery store, and you're trying to figure out what to get, and you're reading some label on something, that you hear that little voice, you're not supposed to eat that. Remember how you felt afterwards the last time you ate that? That little voice, that little grocery store voice, or voice that comes up so many times. Don't you remember? That little voice that helps you remember. And the more we call out to hear that voice, to beg to hear that voice, the more that voice will become active within us, will become an active participant in our lives, or your old friends come by, right? And they find you at the temple, and they invite you to go out with them like you used to do. Come on, man, what's wrong with a little beer or having a joint? Why have you become so uptight? I have a god sister who went home to visit her family, and her father asked her, "What's wrong with you, Mary? You used to enjoy a good steak." So all those voices that we can always choose to turn toward, or to turn toward Krishna, right? Yeah, we can lean into the higher self, or we can lean out to our shadow selves, to the calling of that lower self. And maybe you've all heard this before, that there are two dogs fighting within us. And the question is, they're fighting. The question is, who's going to win? I see Mitravinda's here, and this is something her guru, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, used to quote from a Native American source, an indigenous people source. So the question is, they're fighting, who's going to win? Anybody want to shout out? Who will win if they're both fighting? Anybody heard this before? Maybe you haven't heard it before. Okay, so the two dogs within me are fighting, and think about it. Which one's going to win?
The one that we feed them more.
Yeah, the one that we feed the most is the one that's going to win the fight. So if I'm always trying to feed that higher self, I'll become more attuned to the voice of that higher self, my own higher self, and then the super self, the supreme self, Krishna. So Krishna, or God, Krishna by any name, he's calling out to us through all the scriptures of the world. I don't know if you've heard this Sanskrit mantra before. Sometimes it's sung in kirtan. Asato mam sat gamaya, tamaso ma jatir gamaya, mritur ma amritam gamaya. Come away from, Vishaka recognizes this from her parents, I see, yeah?
Yes.
Come away from the temporary, from the pain of illusion, come to the light of immortality, right? And then, I'm also reminded, what does the Bible say? This is reflected everywhere. What does the Bible say? Don't lay your treasures where moth and dust corrupt, right? Don't put your heart's treasures in places that are just going to be destroyed and disappoint you and make you cry, right? So these are a few points on that first half of the verse. And I wanted to now go into the second half of the verse, which I feel is so often misunderstood. I'm just going to turn off this phone completely so it doesn't keep beeping on me. There we go. So yeah, the second half of the verse, often misunderstood. This great King Rishabdev, he's about to renounce the world, go to the forest and live like a covered madman. People think he's a madman, but he was a great, great realized soul. And he's actually the founder of the Jain religion, although they sort of veer off in some ways. But he was the inspiration for the Jain religion also. So he's begging us, he's begging his sons, right? And speaking to us through Srimad Bhagavatam to approach the door. This word Mahat Seva Dvaram. Mahat means the great souls. Seva means to serve. Dvaram means the door. So approach the door of the holy people, the door of service to saintly people. Or as it says in the Bible, knock, right? Knock and the door shall be open. Seek and ye shall find, right? So, but then there's this other door, the door to darkness, to the hellish conditions of bondage. This is the second half of the verse. Tamodvaram yositam sangi sangam. So in the word-for-word translation of the verse, it says, to associate with those not interested in the path of liberation, the path of serving spiritual persons, who associate with those who are fond of women and sex, the path to hell is wide open. So let's unpack this. This is talking about associating with materialistic-minded people of both genders, woman hunters and man hunters as well, right? And just to give a little bit of context, traditionally, historically, the scriptures were written by male renunciates for other male renunciates. And what did women represent? Women represented hearth and home and family attachment, right? Which these male renunciates were trying to move away from. I mean, if you look at Indian culture and how people are so loving and attached to their families, that's tough. That's not easy. So that's why this is stressed in so many places in the scriptures. So King Rishabdev is speaking to his sons here, right? But we might ask, well, where are his daughters, right? If he had any daughters, then they would probably be at home doing their household chores as well as their spiritual practices. And it was a male project to renounce the world, to go to the forest or to go to the Himalayas. But spiritually inclined women, and that was most of society at that time, they were practicing at home, very sincerely, but practicing at home. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada discusses the difference between the impersonalist and the devotees. In the Bhakti tradition, the devotee tradition, coming down from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, many of our great saints were married people. So if you're not supposed to associate with women, why be married? The Bhakti tradition is a revolutionary tradition that was very uplifting to married people and women and so-called untouchables or so-called low-caste people. Srila Prabhupada once mentioned that of the, maybe you're all familiar with the Panchatattva, the five, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas. Srila Prabhupada once mentioned that of the five of them, four of them were married, and Lord Chaitanya married twice after his first wife passed away, right? Ramanujacharya, another great bhakti saint and acharya, or a great teacher, he also had many famous saintly devotees who were married and so-called lower caste people. But here's another difference between the impersonalist tradition and the bhakti tradition. In the impersonalist tradition, only Brahmin renunciates were eligible. They would take sannyas, they would be renunciates, and that was the tradition. But Lord Chaitanya, he gave the title namacharya to the so-called outcast, untouchable Muslim Haridas Thakur, and he embraced him, and he was dancing, carrying his dead body, and placed it in samadhi in his burial ceremony on the banks of the ocean there at Puri. And of course, there were women Vaishnavi gurus in the bhakti line as well. The wife of Advaita Acharya, Sita Thakurani, was an initiating guru. She had men and women as her disciples. The daughter of Srinivasa Acharya, Hemlata Thakurani, was an initiating guru. And of course, there were others. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada's guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Srila Prabhupada himself were all criticized by caste-conscious sectarian people. And even Srila Prabhupada's own godbrothers criticized Srila Prabhupada for giving Brahmin initiation and sannyas to people outside of the what's called Varnashram system, and giving equal opportunities to his women disciples. So this is something very interesting and important to note. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita and in Srila Prabhupada's purports to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's some very strong statements about this. So I wanted to read from one of Srila Prabhupada's purports in case you think, oh, Rukmini, she's just making all this stuff up. Here's what Srila Prabhupada says. This is, if some of you scholars out there, if you want to note this down, this is Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, 31st chapter. Oh, Adi Lila, whoops, I think I missed the chapter, but 31st and 2nd verse of the chapter. Here's the verse. Seeing that the Mayavadis, that means impersonalists, and others were fleeing, Lord Chaitanya thought, I wanted everyone to be immersed in this inundation of love of Godhead, but some of them have escaped. Therefore, I shall devise a trick to drown them also. And then here's Srila Prabhupada's important purport. Srila Prabhupada says, here is an important point. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to invent a way to capture the Mayavadis and others who did not take interest in the Krishna consciousness movement. This is the symptom of an acharya. An acharya who comes for the service of the Lord cannot be expected to conform to a stereotype, for he must find the ways and means by which the Krishna consciousness movement may be spread. Okay, now here comes Prabhupada's strong language. Sometimes jealous persons criticize the Krishna consciousness movement because it engages equally both boys and girls in distributing love of Godhead. There you are all together. Krishna, the Kirtan house, Bhakti Academy, boys and girls together. Some people might criticize that, right? For distributing love of Godhead, not knowing that boys and girls in countries like Europe and America mix freely. These fools and rascals criticize the boys and girls in Krishna consciousness for intermingling. But these rascals should consider that one cannot suddenly change a community's social customs. However, since both the boys and the girls are being trained to become preachers, these girls are not ordinary girls, but are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. Therefore, to engage both boys and girls in fully transcendental activities is a policy intended to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. There's just one more little paragraph. I know it's hard to listen to reading, but this is great stuff. So then Prabhupada says, these jealous fools who criticize the intermingling of boys and girls will simply have to be satisfied with their own foolishness, because they cannot think of how to spread Krishna consciousness by adopting the ways and means that are favorable for this purpose. Their stereotyped methods will never help spread Krishna consciousness. Therefore, what we are doing is perfect by the grace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Isn't that beautiful? Prabhupada says, what we are doing is perfect, but then so humbly he says, by the grace of Lord Chaitanya. For it is he who proposed to invent a way to capture those who strayed from Krishna consciousness. So the reason I bring up these words of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada is to clarify this verse. So the idea is to associate with someone of the opposite gender for sexual exploitation is the door to hell, right? I see you as a sex object. You see me as a sex object. This creates a hellish condition in the world, right? But sharing these messages of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is words spoken about Krishna, or sharing the messages of Bhagavad Gita, which is words spoken by Krishna, that's spiritual activity. And when it's done respectfully and sincerely and with all humility by anyone of any race or any gender or any culture or any community anywhere, this is the mission of Lord Chaitanya. This is the mission of Srila Prabhupada, following in the line of Lord Chaitanya. So that's the point I wanted to make. And then talking a little bit, because Prabhupada does mention this in the purport, the idea of reaching out to help others. So here's something from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati, beautiful poetry of Sharanagati, about that mood of how to share this message. So the point is, do I want to go to the place of exploitation, or do I want to go to this place of sharing spiritual life, right? So here's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says in this mood of longing. He says, when will there be an awakening of compassion for all fallen souls? And when will this Bhaktivinoda, forgetting his own happiness, with a meek heart, set out to propagate by humble entreaty the sacred order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Isn't that beautiful? So what is that sacred order of Lord Chaitanya? Chant the holy name of Krishna, worship and serve Krishna, and learn about Krishna from the holy scriptures, and share it. When we love something, we like to share it, right? If you're tasting something yummy, you want to share it. So thank you all so much. And I want to leave time for any questions, or what was important for you. What's a takeaway for you here? I have so many stories I can share. We could go on all day, but yeah, what was important for you here, or what was unclear to you here? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rukmini Prabhu. That was such a nice class. Such a nice class.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking your precious time to listen.
Great. Does anyone have any questions, reflections? Yes. Yes, Nita.
Well, you were talking about how Prabhupada was saying that, we can't change, you can't just expect people's culture to completely change while you preach into them. You have to adapt to what the expectations are already in place. In terms of how, like, in Europe and the West, men and women already mingle together freely, so you couldn't expect to, like...
Vishaka, I'm wondering, can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Piece, because it's hard to hear.
Sure. I'll repeat the question.
Or maybe it's not a question, whatever, it's a reflection, whatever it is, yeah.
I was just thinking, it reminds me of things I've heard about how part of how Christianity can spread so successfully is that a lot of the cultures they encountered that they preached to, they found ways to incorporate local traditions into Christian theology. That, like, if you look at Irish Catholics, they use a lot of artistic styles and traditions from old Celtic ways, but redirected towards Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did everyone hear that? Okay. Or Vishaka, you want to kind of summarize that?
Well, she's talking about like how Christianity in different cultures and countries, they're successful, or they're able to preach in a nicer way just because they're not changing the cultures too much. Like how there's so much emphasis here to just to just be like how people are in East. So she's reflecting on that one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that's a really great point. Actually, there's a fantastic book by an author, a sociologist named Rodney Stark. Forget the title exactly, about the spread of Christianity. And it's interesting because previously scholars thought that Christianity spread more through the men. But when this sociologist researched early Christianity, he found this is a really interesting point. That it was many of the women. His point was that it was many of the aristocratic women who were adopting Christianity and then bringing their husbands to Christianity as well. And in Rome, what they saw is that because the Christians were caring for each other and caring for the ordinary people who were not Christians. They were living through the plague, and the people who were not Christians were tending to die off. So people were so moved by their compassion that people started becoming Christians as well. So yeah, adopting to some extent the local cultures. And it's a really important point. Like I know in India, Gauravani and I, before COVID, we were taking groups to India every year. We went to Chennai and we visited the temple, what is it called? The Church on the Mount, which is the place where the doubting Thomas was martyred. And we went into the church, and in that church there, it sounds like they're singing Indian bhajans. They're all Christians. They're Indian Christians. And they're singing it sounds just like Hindu bhajans. So they've adopted the methods because that's the love of the people there. So it's a very, very important point. And one other point, we have a Vaishnav Christian dialogue from India every year. We did it over Zoom just a few weeks ago. And Indian Christians who, they've adopted many, and they've studied the Bhagavad Gita, and they've adopted many of the traditions of India and incorporated them into their Christianity. So it's an important point. You have to be sensitive to people's culture, right? Thanks. Important point. Anything else? What else does all this bring up for everyone?
There was another, from the first part, I really like the example of two dogs. So whomsoever you feed more will be strong. So it's very important to take care of that part. And for the second part of the discussion, I really like how you have explained and how people usually misunderstand. And I think it's still prevalent even now. That, women, like all these statements that Prabhupada made are so misunderstood. Yes. And how you explain them by giving examples, like all four Panchatattvas, they were all married. And Lord Chaitanya married twice because the first wife couldn't survive. And that was really amazing. Thank you for explaining that.
Because let's look at it. If someone is if a man is struggling to be celibate and he's attached to women, he's attached to his old girlfriend, when he sees women, he's gonna, women are bad, but it's within himself that he's got his own struggle. In the same way, women may be struggling. That, I may be attached to my old boyfriend and I'm trying to come to Krishna consciousness, or maybe I should marry my boyfriend. Maybe he's also, on the spiritual path, and we're both struggling, and we can struggle together, So it's not to objectify the cause of my attachment, but look within myself. Did any of you ever see that cartoon, that Pogo cartoon? And he's sitting under a tree and he says, "We have found the enemy, and he is us. We have found the enemy, and he is us." So the enemy is within myself. We don't have to point a finger and spit on low caste people or so-called untouchables, or spit on women, or spit on men, I'm so attached to men, I spit on all of you guys. No, so it can go both ways. I can be, what do they say? A man killer, right? I can be a woman hunter, or I can be a man killer. It goes both ways. But we have to understand the scriptures. It's very important we understand the scriptures in context and understand who was the original audience and how were women practicing in ancient times. Of course, now we're able to practice right alongside our brothers. I'll tell you a little story. I have so many stories, but one story, I'll tell you two. I'm going to tell you two stories. Okay. Yeah. So one story is, this took place in the Calcutta temple in maybe about 1970, 71. And it was a very, very crowded place. The temple's still in the same place, but they've enlarged it. So where there were men and women there serving together, it was very crowded. I think you had to walk through the women's ashram to get to the bathroom or something. It was just crazy, too crowded. So one morning, all the men were out on the walk with Srila Prabhupada. Well, guess what? The women were cooking the breakfast, cleaning Srila Prabhupada's room, serving the deities, doing basically everything at the temple while the men were out on the walk with Srila Prabhupada. And on this walk, the men were complaining to Srila Prabhupada. And the fact is, they had good reason to complain because the temple really was too crowded. But they're saying, Prabhupada, the temple's too crowded. There's no room for women here. We have to get rid of the women. They're agitating our brains. We don't like looking at them. And they're going on and on and on. The whole walk, Srila Prabhupada didn't say a word. He didn't say one word, right? And then they come back to and you can hear the recording. When they come back to the temple, all the women are there to greet Srila Prabhupada standing on each side of the steps. There were beautiful steps. It was like a Victorian sort of a home. And the women are with their hands folded on both sides of the steps. Srila Prabhupada walks up the steps and he looks at the women and then he looks back at the men and he says, but if you associate with these women, you will go back to Godhead. They are Vaishnavis. If you associate with them, you will go back to Godhead. And he just walked off into his room. So that's one very nice illustrative story that I love. Another story I'll share, and this one's about me. This was in 1968, probably before many of you were born. So this is in the very first temple, 26 2nd Avenue. Srila Prabhupada had a little apartment up behind in the back of the courtyard. And a few of us were in his room with him and he was speaking. And he was looking into each one of our eyes. And he was saying, I want each one of you to open a temple somewhere, looking from one to the next to the next. And I was quite shocked. I was 16 years old at the time. Quite shocked. And I said, we called him Swamiji at that time. And I said, even the girls, Swamiji? I was shocked. The girls. And Prabhupada started laughing, just like a kindly grandfather. He was just laughing. And he said, yes, there is no difference between the boys and the girls. When you are sharing Krishna consciousness, there is no difference. And then he started speaking about the great woman Acharya, Janava Devi, who was the wife of Lord Nityananda. And he said that she was the head of the whole disciplic succession at that time, you know. So those are two stories that illustrate the thinking of the great Bhakti Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, coming in the line of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is our line. Don't be confused. Please understand, this is the broad-minded thinking of our great Acharya. It's not stereotyped, as Srila Prabhupada said. It's being given according to time, place, and candidate and circumstance. Yeah. What else? Anybody else have any thoughts or something troubling or question or what was important?
Any thoughts, Prabhus?
What did you like? What did you not like?
Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I just said, what did you like? What did you not like? Yeah, share something. We have 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
Any of you Vaishnavis on Zoom, if you have any thoughts also?
Yeah, go ahead.
I go.
Quiet group.
Okay, then I can. I was just wondering, these wonderful students. I was just eager to hear what they are thinking and what their questions are. But anyway, I'm just thinking, yeah, we have this conditioned nature and also material culture. Wherever we are coming from west, east, we are somehow conditioned. But above that, we have spiritual culture. So how we can overcome this conditioning cultures, somehow come to the point to really act from this spiritual culture where we are spiritually united and there is no such a division.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful question. So how can everybody get the question? How can we nourish that spiritual culture as opposed to the materialistic culture? How can we go through the door of the Mahat Seva Dwaram, the door to service to the saintly people, as opposed to the other door that brings us down? How can we choose the right door? So, you know, the first thing I thought when I heard your question is, have you ever heard this before? That Krishna consciousness is caught more than it's taught. Have you ever heard that before? It's caught more than it's taught. So we may be preach, but sometimes our actions are not actually reflecting what we're preaching. So it's up to each one of us to search out those Mahat people within our lives, within our temple, within our wherever we are. Like sometimes in a temple, sometimes you might think, well, wow, this temple president's not even walking his talk or her talk, but sometimes the person cleaning the bathroom is the most realized person in the temple. Sometimes the person washing the pots is doing that with tears in his eyes or tears in her eyes. So we have to search out, where is that authentic, deep, heartfelt Krishna consciousness that I can catch, not just hear lip service. So we have to be authentic ourselves in order to recognize what's authentic, right? If I'm not cultivating and hearing and chanting and with longing in my heart, I won't be able to recognize what's authentic in someone else. If I myself am a cheater, then I will see everybody else as a cheater. There's a Vedic aphorism that everyone sees the world to be like themselves. So if I want to recognize the authentic doorway to the service of the great souls, I have to really chant and pray and beg, Krishna, help me to see, give me the vision to see the dirt in my own heart so that I can also recognize what's authentic in the world and go to that place and long for that place and search that. So somebody, if you see a saintly person in the temple or anywhere, you can serve that person, help that person, hear from that person, learn from that person. But sometimes it's the newest people. Sometimes it's the youngest people. Like, what does it say in the Bible? From the mouths of babes, right? Sometimes we hear the deepest truth from somebody who's very young, So we have to be recognized. And any thoughts on that? Krishna Kirtan House. Any thoughts?
Yeah, you have to share something.
Yes, please.
Hare Krishna.
You are the youth. We want to hear from you. You are the future. We want to hear from you. Okay, yes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for the amazing class. Some of the points I mentioned were similar to Vishakha's points. I loved how you mentioned the two dogs, again, fighting who will win, and that we have the choice to feed either our higher self or our lower self. And then also how this movement was so revolutionary because it gave equal opportunity to those outside of the caste system / Varnashram system. And then the success rate of this movement has to do also with adapting to different environments. And the stories that you just mentioned, the one about the crowded temple where all the men went on the walk and the women stayed back to serve. And then they received Prabhupada at the steps of this beautiful house, and he looked at both sides of the women and the men. He turned back and he said, but if you associate with these women, you'll go back to Godhead. They're Vaishnavis. I thought that was so beautiful. I thought it was so beautiful.
Yeah, that was very beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you. You reminded me of another story that I want to share. Maybe let's
Please go
now
ahead.
we have a cutoff at 8:30 because some of you have to go to work, right?
That's okay. We can still listen to the story.
This will be our closing story. So once there was this is maybe about 1971. There was a 71, maybe 73. Anyway, there's a beautiful, very strong woman who's a book distributor. She was one of the top book distributors in the world. Her name was Mula Prakriti. And she was coming back from book distribution, and Prabhupada asked that she would come into his room. He wanted to hear about her book distribution. And he told her, first of all, he told her that the women in Krishna consciousness are Lord Chaitanya's secret weapon for spreading Krishna consciousness. He told her that. And then he shared kind of a funny story, and I'm going to just close with this story. So he said that in Calcutta at one time when he was young, there was a product that they were selling. I think they still sell it called Brahmi hair oil. And he said there was no proof, there was no research that it was effective at all. But because they had very respectable young women going door to door and knocking on people's doors selling this product. And he was saying that in the Kali Yuga, if a man knocks on someone's door, people feel a little afraid. But because they were very respectable women, young women, people would open the door for them and they would believe them and they would buy this product. And he said this product became wildly successful because these young women were so sincere and authentic and so respectable in the way they were presenting it. So this is what he was speaking about, how we should present Krishna consciousness, and how women in Krishna consciousness are not exploiters. They are not Maya Devis. They are the secret weapons of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So
I just have one question. Would you like to come to Toronto and spend some time with us and share some pastimes? See, everyone is literally requesting that. And yeah, we really need to hear these pastimes. I just want you to, just continue. I don't want you to stop.
Thank you. I was in Toronto one time in my life, and I heard a funny story that they film a lot of movies in Toronto.
Oh, we have a filmmaker sitting right here.
Oh, you're a filmmaker. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. So what I heard when I was there is when they want the movie to look like New York or Chicago, they have to throw a lot of garbage around on the street to make it look like the US. There's one incident, the film crew broke for lunch. They went away to have lunch. And when they came back, all the garbage was cleaned up because it's Toronto. Garbage in the street in Toronto. So they had to get more garbage and put it around in the street to continue their filming. So that was a funny story.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was done by Bhakti Marg Swami.
Wonderful. All glories to Bhakti Marg Swami, and all glories to the Kirtan House, Bhakti Academy in Toronto. Thank you all so much. You are the future. Prabhupada said we should all go to the future and show the people there how much Krishna loves them by the way we treat them. So thank you for this kind invitation. All
Thank
glories
you so much, Mother Rukmini. Thank you so much.
All
Hare
glories to
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.